everybody, and welcome back to WhatCulture. We have another lovely horror podcast for you this week, and I am Ash Millman, joined by Kirsten Ria.
Hello.
And also by Josh Brown.
Hello.
Your spooky threesome. I'm trying to think of a good word to go with threesome. Your troublesome threesome. Guys, jump in and save me here.
Triple threat would have been good. You
Triple
need
threat.
to go to the spooky threesome. What are you thinking?
Triple threat. It's a triple
Scooby
threat.
gang.
It's a three-pronged attack. It is the trident of horror is what it is. So we're back again with some more spooky shenanigans for you. And this time I'm going to talk about horror remakes because one of the best films of this year, if not the best horror film of this year, is The Invisible Man, which is obviously a remake of a very old property. And remakes have always been this kind of nebulous thing in the horror community where some people love them, some people hate them, some of them are amazing, some of them are complete trash. So we can have a little breakdown of the ones that we really enjoy, what we think are the best ever, and also some underrated ones, and basically just everything remake. That's what we're going to do. We're going to look at everything to do with remakes, good, bad, ugly, all that sort of stuff. We did it with the best horror movies of 2020. We did it with TV shows as well. Got to look at everything. So remakes is next on the agenda. Now, I'm going to jump right in to begin with our favourites, because I think starting on a high note is obviously preferred. So I'm going to throw over to you guys, throw over to you, Josh, first, because you are the king of remake. You talk about remakes, horror remakes all the time. You say you love them. You want to consume every single one of them, I believe you have said previously. So what do you think is the ultimate remake or your favourite remake, and why? Why does it stand out as a good remake, and what does it offer up that you think is good for a remake to do?
You know what, Ash? Those were my exact words there. I love them all and want to watch them all. You know, you're absolutely correct. Because I do think there's been a lot of good ones, but the one that sprung to mind that you two hadn't already stolen was Suspiria, which the remake of Suspiria, obviously, which came out a few years ago, which, you know, for like the longest time, I wasn't here for it because this was a movie that was in development hell for like decades, like literally so long. But they just managed to give me something that I didn't know I expected, because I love the original Suspiria, like I mentioned on one of these podcasts a few weeks ago. But this new version was more or less like the inverse of that. It traded the kind of cartoony colors for more or less a gray color grading. It swapped out the epic score from Goblin from this kind of weird, almost like indie romance soundtrack from Tom York. It shouldn't have fit at all. And yet, for me, it all worked. It was like so mad, but in a completely different way. And it managed to, for me, keep the spirit of the original Suspiria while giving me a movie that was otherwise completely different. And I think that has to be commended. I don't know whether I would watch it again because it's 3 hours and it's completely gruesome. But I remember I watched it in the cinema with a friend of mine who absolutely loved it. He'd already seen it once before and he convinced me to go. And it was just one of those horror movie going experiences that you only get so often. For me, it's like recently it's been that, Midsummer, and maybe Hereditary, where you're kind of like stuck to your seat just getting this more or less, you know, sensory assault from a movie that completely subverts your expectations and gives you something that you didn't think you wanted and yet was still really good. Because I think that's what horror is all about, you know what I mean? When you expect something, it's not scary. If you know what's coming, then even if you love it, even if you love the original, it's getting remade beat for beat, you can enjoy it, but you want to be scared, you want to be surprised, you want to have that sort of element of chaos in there that I think, for me anyway, I don't know what you guys actually think about this, but for me, Suspiria has it.
Ooh, there's lots of really interesting points there, because half of them I agree with and half of them I hate. Like personally, when it comes to horror movie stuff, I respect all of them, but I agree that if you're remaking something, throwing in a new element is really important, and Suspiria did do that exceptionally well. But for me, seeing Dario Argento's classic and then see it get transformed into this new version that wasn't anything resembling Suspiria. I don't know why it had the Suspiria name. It was a wonderful piece of cinema and I really liked it. But I feel like it could have told its own story a little bit differently rather than capitalizing on that franchise. But then again, it's still a great movie. Like, I think there's definitely something to be said for elevated horror being around at the moment. That's a whole different conversation. But yeah, Suspiria, a great remake, but one that makes me question if it needed to be Suspiria. I think it would have stood up on its own 2 feet in any other circumstance quite well as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I kind of want to know what you guys think about it, because obviously, you know, you have remakes of horror movies that are literally shot for shot like the Vince Vaughn version of Psycho, and yet you have something on the other end of the spectrum that's completely different, like Suspiria. So for me, going into remakes, even though I've seen so many, I don't fully know what I want. Sometimes, like, I really enjoy something when it's incredibly faithful to the source material, and yet, like Suspiria, I really enjoy it when they kind of go a bit mad and kind of do like invert what you expect. And I do think you're right, Dash, that it could be its own thing. Like, there's no real reason why it needed to be called Suspiria. But for me, there's actually a kind of enjoyment from that, because there are, when you name something that's based on a previous property, you instantly make connections in your head. It has connotations with certain things, which I do think makes the subversion easier. But it's like a huge topic. Like, I don't know which remakes I prefer. I do think I err on the side of the likes of Suspiria, but I don't know. It's all good content, Jim. You know what I mean? It's all good stuff.
Absolutely. What do you think, Kirsten?
I agree that I think remakes for me have to be like reliable to the source material, but there's nothing wrong with making changes, I don't think, as long as they're not too drastic. Like with The Invisible Man, they kind of made it more updated to kind of fit the time period, which I thought was just brilliantly clever, because it was like, oh, okay, that's something that could believably happen. But with instances like the new Grudge movie, where it was just it didn't keep to the source material at all, and it just didn't make any sense. And even just watching the trailer, I was just completely thrown off, because I was like, no, this isn't what The Grudge is about. That's at least with the Sarah Michelle Gellar like remake, they kind of stuck to the source material and they kept it in Japan, and they did keep aspects of it. It wasn't great, but it still had the similar storyline. And then, like you said, with the whole Vince Vaughn like shot for shot remake, it still works because it's bringing such an old movie to a new audience, and that's completely fine. And I think it worked really well. So yeah, I think there's a fine line between making doing a shot for shot remake and then also making subtle tweaks. But yeah, it's a fine line. You have to kind of stick to the source material, not change it so much that it doesn't resemble the old film, but change it enough that it is kind of still relatable and maybe to a new time and a new audience, basically.
Yeah, definitely. I think that there's something to be said for a remake that can do its own thing and like establish itself as, oh, okay, we're expanding on this lore. You've seen all this before. Here's all the key beats you need to know, and here's this take on it. I think that's a really interesting way of doing remakes, and something they should all aspire to is have their own stamp on it, definitely. But yeah, it's a big old barrel of confusion when it comes to this sort of thing, because you don't know. I agree that you don't know what you want until you served it up with remakes. You don't know if you want something that is so similar that you're seeing the same thing again and a new audience gets introduced to it, but then what's the point in remaking it? Or if you want something completely different, but then does that spit in the face of the original? I do not know. What would you say your favourite is, or one that you think deserves attention, Kirsten?
I think my favorite remake has to be the Thing, to be honest, which at the time when I watched it, I mean, I was very young at the time, probably younger than I should have been to watch The Thing. But at the time of watching, I didn't know it was a remake. So yeah, sort of learning those details, it's like, oh, okay. To be able to, like you said, sort of make a film that can stand alone on itself, you wouldn't even necessarily know it was a remake, and still for it to do so well on its own without that knowledge, I think that's what makes a good remake, is having something where you're like, oh, I didn't realize that it existed before. And yeah, The Thing is it's just brilliant. John Carpenter's a very talented man. Everything about that film, the story, the special effects, the actors, the characters, everything is just perfect about that entire film, and it's just shot so incredibly well. Obviously, I know that they did do, what was the follow-up to The Thing? Was it called Things?
It was just called The Thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was the same again.
The same name.
The prequel one from the later version.
Yeah. But that just confused me, because they had this guy which looked very similar to the character in the first film, and I was like, hang on a second, is this supposed to be a remake, or is it a prequel or a sequel? Like I was very confused. So in those sort of aspects, I think it's very cheeky to have something which is supposed to be like, I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be like a prequel or happening during the same time, or a sequel. No, sequel. Yes. But to call it the same name, they're the sort of things that I think is very cheeky, is calling something, like you said, with Suspiria, calling it the same name, but then upon watching it, realizing actually it's not the same film. It's a completely different take, completely new story almost, and that's what I think is quite cheeky with remakes. That's what when I think that's when the line is crossed, is just sticking that stamp on it saying, this is the thing, or this is Suspiria, and then sitting down watching it going, no, it's not. You lied to me.
This isn't what I asked for.
Yeah.
I think there's definitely like a line between films that can be remade and maybe get away with it a bit better. Suspiria and The Thing definitely fall into that, because the originals, well, maybe not the Thing as in the original The Thing, because I feel like that was so underseen or not quite as appreciated as much that there was room to do it again. But Suspiria being such a big name to begin with, doing it again, you just would never be able to remake it the same way. So I think them going, oh, okay, actually, no, we're going to do our own thing because it's impossible to do this again, is also one way of doing it. And then also going, oh, well, nobody's seen this, so let's do it in a whole new way because nobody saw it the first time, with The Thing from outer space. That might kind of fix things up that way. My one of my personal favorite remakes, and one that I think walks the line of taking all of the core messages, taking the core violence and visceral action and spinning it into something particularly interesting and novel for a remake, would be the Dawn of the Dead 2004 remake, which gave us Zack Snyder.
You know what? The Dawn of the Dead remake is so good and so genuinely scary, considering it's so like action packed. I used to be terrified of that thing, man. Like the opening, especially with like a little girl zombie. Nah, done. An advert of that for the telly would send me crying to bed and ask my mum for a bit of ice cream. I don't know. When I was little. Sorry, I completely derailed your point. What were you going to say about Dawn of the Dead?
I also watched that film and asked my mom for a bit of ice cream because it is very scary and it is done well. And I feel like, again, it's George Romero. Looking at his stuff, you go, whoa, okay, that's untouchable. That is pristine horror royalty. Who's going to dare remake that because they're just going to like duff it up? And then they take it and did something new with it and updated it for a modern audience and made it like just an intense own thing, and establishing Zack Snyder as his own person and having his own establishing Zack Snyder as his own person, whether people agree with that being a good thing or not. His style of filmmaking is so clear cut that applying that to an old property is an interesting way of doing it as well. I'm kind of going back on my points here because I'm like, oh, why would they put the same name on something if it's completely different? But also, it's nice seeing a director's own take on it, but then they could be making their own stuff as well, but maybe this is the into the industry that they need to get to be able to sell their own horror things. But yeah, Dawn of the Dead as a remake and as a movie for both movies is just so exceptional. It's so entertaining. It brought zombie movies back to the fore. I feel like each time it's come out, it's had something new and exciting to say and deliver that reflects the society that it's in. I think that is also an interesting point for remakes, is reflecting the time they're in. I know, Kirsten, you said that. So many different options that they can do for it. But yeah, Dawn of the Dead, chef's kiss.
I think you make a good point there about like these horror movies that get remade. They're such a product of their time, you know what I mean? Like the original Dawn of the Dead, that's such that was like one of the first, big horror movies to kind of criticize consumerism and that's obviously, well documented. But it was also like this scrappy indie, like when they were shooting on nights in this mall and they were kind of like getting away with murder, more or less, shooting it on a really limited budget. And that sort of adds to the mythology of the movie. That's part of the story as much as the characters or the sets or anything. And that's not easily, you can't replicate that, you know what I mean? 40, 20, 30 years on or whatever. So you've got to update it with kind of like a new vision within a new context. And I think Dawn of the Dead 04 does that like really well. And I do think it's more interesting when directors with a signature style like Zack Snyder, love it or hate it. It's something to latch onto, and it gives these remakes like a different energy because there is a vision behind it. The thing we love about the original horror movies that we're talking about today is that they have such a distinct vision behind it. George A. Romero, John Carpenter. And if you just get kind of like a journeyman to update those for modern audiences, it doesn't work because there's not that voice in there. It's a replication of a previous voice. Whereas, I think Dawn of the Dead 04 works because it's Zack Snyder, again, for better or worse, looking at the material, going, this is what I like about it. This is what I think can be improved. This is how I'm going to put my stamp on it. Here you go. And that makes for a movie that isn't just retreading the original. It's paying homage to it. It's trying to create a similar experience to it, but it's very much its own thing despite having the name, and yet it doesn't feel like its own thing. It's such a weird thing because you get to have your cake and eat it too. It's distinctly Dawn of the Dead, and yet it's also distinctly Zack Snyder, and that's not an easy thing to pull off.
Yeah, I think that's kind of like the apex that horror movies are trying to reach for this sort of thing, really. I think also this kind of leads into another point on foreign language remakes. So movies that come from other countries that then get taken, churned up, and delivered in an English language format. So stuff like Quarantine, The Ring, The Eye, One Missed Call, Mirrors, that sort of thing. Like all the ones that have usually J-horror it's taken from, and then are spun into the same format again, just with English like speaking. I can't stand it. I hate it. Even though it's only the only way that it works is if they don't take and do a shot-for-shot remake. Like Quarantine really riles me up because it's a great movie, but it's only a great movie because it's a shot-for-shot remake of Wreck, and more people should watch Wreck instead. And the same with The Ring, actually, is probably the only one I would say stands out as its own good thing because it was one that spanned its own vision on it again. I think this is probably what we're boiling down to. It's that remakes are okay if the director has something new or a personal stamp or a wash they can put over it that brings something exciting and different to a table and maybe adapts something and takes it and shifts it into a new perspective that wasn't offered in the original one. But yeah, there's all sorts of foreign language remakes that both do good and both do very, very bad. Like I say, One Missed Call. Poo-poo, horrible. But yeah, would you guys agree with that, or like, is there any that you particularly like, or would you defend them?
Well, it's funny you should mention, Ash, because the one I've got written down for my underrated horror movie is Let Me In, which is obviously a remake of Let the Right One In. So it is kind of on the same lines of this, like a foreign language movie getting like adapted. But at the same time, in general, I would absolutely agree with you because I just think it's just kind of like lazy. It's a bit like they don't need to be remade in a lot of cases. Sometimes, there is cause for perhaps updating the story or, quote unquote westernizing the story or whatever. But for the most part, like it's kind of the lowest common denominator kind of style of remake. It's just like, okay, this isn't in English language, so I guess we've got to remake it because God forbid any, English or American audiences watch something that isn't in English or American. I do think for the most part that turns out just kind of naff because whatever spark was in the original can't be totally replicated. But then you're also thinking, are the good parts of this just things that have been directly, copied or whatever? Yeah. There are some exceptions, like I would say Let Me In is really good because I think Matt Reeves is a director. Like he's going to make the next Batman movie. Like hell yeah. He's really good at what he does. And then you've got some other oddities like the 2 versions of Funny Games that are shot for shot, just in like different languages with new actors that are kind of odd. So there are exceptions to the rule, but in general, I would definitely agree because when you remake something like Martyrs or like you said, Wreck and Quarantine is the biggie. It's just sort of why do I need 2 versions of the same movie? I don't need it, and more often than not, the first version is better anyway.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, no, I agree and disagree. Like you said, I think it's nice in a sense to have. I think the only reason that a shot-for-shot remake is good is because it is getting a good film and a good story out to an audience that I guess otherwise wouldn't see it. But then at the same time, you do have that kind of backhand that's just sort of like, hang on a second, they have just completely stole this story from a very talented director and team and just kind of put their own name on it. And that's where I think it is where I don't like that aspect, is like you said with like Quarantine and like Let Me In, like there's some aspects where you're like, okay, well I can kind of understand the story a little bit better now and I kind of don't have to keep glancing downwards for like subtitles. But at the same time, it has just completely stolen this story from a talented team of people. And I think there's 2 types of film and horror fans out there. And there is the people that will just watch a good movie because it's a good movie. It doesn't matter if it's in English or not. They'll just watch it and enjoy it. And they'll still say, yeah, that was amazing. And then there's the other group of people that will only watch something if it is in the language that they are speaking. And it's a shame that people are like that. My mother, unfortunately, is one of them. She refuses to watch anything with subtitles. Even I have tried to throw some amazing Guillermo del Toro's her way, and she refuses to watch them because I don't want to look at the subtitles. So it's a shame that there are some people that are like that, and sometimes you just can't sway them. But in that aspect, that is the only way that you're going to get a good film into their eyeballs is by having a remake, which is unfortunate, but hey.
I will say, like, you do make a good point there in that it gets films, or at least the ideas of films, out to people who may otherwise like not see them. Because the reality is, though, that while these like original foreign language movies exist, they might not get shown in theaters or whatever. So even though they are out there, the average moviegoer might not know about them. Like for me, the first time I knew about the movie Shutter was the American remake, and I thought it was a kind of a naff movie, but it had enough in there to make me kind of intrigued and kind of like scared. I was scared of the concept, and I didn't know it was a remake because I hadn't heard of the original and wasn't showing in any cinemas, at least at the time that I knew of. So that made me go back and then find the original, and I was so kind of pleased that it existed because it allowed that kind of navigation.
Yeah.
Obviously, we have it easier now with the internet and like lists and videos and stuff that, you know, if something gets made that isn't shown in your theaters, you'll still probably hear it. But I don't think that was always the case, you know, back in the day, in that if for as bad as they were, if they do make you leapfrog back to the originals, there's something of worth there, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's always something to be drawn from remakes. If it's bringing audience to the original, if there's passionate fan base that go back and say, oh, everybody go and watch this because this is here as well, then you know what, they're serving a purpose, they're doing their job, they're doing a good thing. What I also think is, to tangent again into more remake talk, I think this also applies to lots of short films that might be in foreign language, that sort of thing, which do get watched and shared a lot more. But there's a massive populace of people who prefer feature length to short films, or because they're mainly internet based, find hard to get to because you don't really have cinematic releases quite as much for short movies. Those getting remade into feature films as well, I think, is a great byproduct of the remake industry. Both for getting new audience to it in the same way, like with translation or that sort of thing, getting new audiences to it, and expanding on a story that maybe wasn't quite there in the original. I've got a few written down, but I think Polaroid is the most recent one for me that I watched. I know it had a massive, horrible production schedule, and it didn't turn out great. The actual feature-length film is rubbish. But then I went back and watched the original, and had a great time with it because it's like a 15-minute movie that I was like, oh my God, I would never have watched this otherwise. I wouldn't have found it. And now this big feature-length release, this big adaptation, this bringing it to like the Hollywood audience has resulted in me going, oh, hey, I'm gonna go have a look at that instead. So again, it's more benefits of the remake. Even if the film is bad, even if the actual result of the remake is caca, then I just reached into the dark for a word there. If the actual remake itself is no good, then there's still positives around it. Even if it's maybe has a negative release, there's positive aspects to be drawn back to the actual film industry itself.
It's funny that you mentioned Polaroid, because last night I was hovering over that on Netflix. I think it was Netflix. Almost going to watch Dash, and I decided not to at the last minute. But now you've made me interested, so I won't watch the film. Instead, I'll go back and watch the short film instead. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's my tea sorted tonight. I might throw it back up afterwards, but
it's one of those that absolutely makes me like, oh, right. I'm gonna have to backtrack on my point a tiny bit, because it's one of those that takes the original premise and puts it at the beginning, and then the rest of the film is the rest of the film. It's like Lights Out, where it takes the original short and goes, oh, here's this lovely thing that you all really liked on the internet that you shared around, you were very scared of it, and now here's the rest of the movie. Lights Out, I think, did a great job with what it was given. It wasn't to my taste because I liked the short too much, and I feel like that had a much more visceral effect as a short story. But David F. Sandberg is a wonder, and his films are great. And just all of his shorts are fantastic. So that he got this platform from doing short films to then remake it into like a feature length, I think, is great. But yeah, just the taking the tiny bit and putting it into a film, I think that happens a lot in remakes, where they know they've got a key point that people are interested in the original version, and then try and replicate that into their films, either as a reference or a homage, or a cheap little, oh, hey, you really liked this bit, here it is again in a new form, rather than coming up with their own ideas. So there's two sides of the same coin with it.
You mentioned, like I don't want to repeat something I mentioned on a past podcast, but that was a problem for me in Doctor Sleep, which obviously isn't a remake, but that had a thing where it was homaging The Shining by recreating the shots and, you know, settings of that movie, like within a new context. But it was just kind of, it's for me, it was harkening back to a reference that I knew without any substance. And I think that's the mistake a lot of these horror remakes make, or a lot of the horror adaptations make, where it's like, okay, people love this section from this movie, so it needs to be in the remake. But if everything around it has changed, or everything around it has altered, the meaning of that sequence is lost, and it's only there because it's recognizable and because people understand the iconography. And I do have an issue with that, because it's careless. It's almost like, I like it when it's done well, don't get me wrong, but I think just doing it kind of brainlessly just because they have to, it sort of misses, for me, it misses the point a little bit. It can be done well, and I have popped big for some great references in horror movie remakes and some recreated sequences, but it needs to be, like all things, it needs to be done with care.
Yeah, no, I agree with both of you in the sense where, you know, if you are going to turn something that is originally a short film into a feature length, that it can be done well. But sometimes the only reason that it does work is because it is a short film. Like you said, with Lights Out, when I first watched that, I thought, wow, this is brilliant. And I remember thinking at the time, like, this would be brilliant as like a feature length film. And then upon watching the actual film, I just like you said, it just seemed like they were like, well, this is what scared you, so we're going to do it pretty much the exact same at the beginning. But then it just seemed like they just didn't really know where to go from there. It was like, well, now we have to kind of explain why this is happening and who this person is and why this is happening to these people. And it just seemed like it just kind of missed the mark. And you can tell that they were really struggling with trying to come up with these explanations. And that's what's good about them being short films, is that you don't have to do that. It's just you watch it, it's scary, and then it has that lasting impression of you. But you don't need to kind of sit there and know the reasons why these things happened. I didn't watch the Lights Out short and then think, well, I need to know who this person is. I need to know what this demon is, this ghost is, why is this happening to these people. It's not something that I needed to know. And I think that's what a lot of horror movies, especially remakes, when they do try to remake something, is they try to chuck so much down your throat and be like, this is why this is happening. Here's a backstory and then flashbacks. And this is the ending that people wanted. And it's like, sometimes we just want to be scared to be scared. We don't need to know all these things. Just scare us, have it finish, and have us sit there and be like, well, I'm not sleeping tonight. not have these explanations to be like, oh, it's okay because it only happened because of this, so therefore it can't possibly happen in real life. That's what's so good about, like, you know, the original Ring and stuff like that, is because there wasn't these backstories, there wasn't these conclusions that were like, oh, you're okay now, it can't happen to you because they've stopped the curse. It was just, no, she's scary, she's going to come out the TV, she's going to kill you. That's it. That's what made it scary.
Looking into the Ring and it having all that weird, like, sea god connotation, all that sort of thing, and all the strange underlying implications that were kind of like skirted around, I think that's really interesting. I'm glad that they didn't like focus too much on that in the remake. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right in some things are better left unsaid and unspoken, and sometimes remakes can take those and spin them out of control. But let's just pull this back a little bit and talk about more underrated ones, because we've gone on loads about all the different types of remake. But Josh, I know you mentioned Let Me In was your underrated one. We had a little talk about that. Kirsten, what would you say is your, like, an underrated remake that you think kind of needs a bit more attention, or maybe didn't get the appreciation it deserved at the time?
Yeah, so House of Wax for me is, I mean, it's not an incredible film, don't get me wrong. There's some questionable performances by said Paris Hilton and some other actors in it. But however, once, spoiler alert, once those characters are killed off, the film is actually quite enjoyable. I think that the story for the film is really good. I've not actually seen the original House of Wax. I remember doing some research after I watched it thinking, oh, this was really good, and realizing it was a remake. And I would really like to go back and watch the original just to see how much they did change. But yeah, I feel like it's a little bit underrated because it's quite an enjoyable film. It's quite gory. The main villain in the film is quite unique. I don't think I've ever seen something like that in a film since. And yeah, just the horrible sort of like torture scenes and just the things that happen within the film are just, yeah, they're really lasting with you. And even now, I haven't seen that film in, I don't know, maybe 12 years, and I still remember a good chunk of it because it's one of those films that you can't really forget because the premise of it is really, really good. So yeah, I would recommend, if you haven't seen House of Wax, even the original or the remake, highly recommend watching them. Just please stick through the first section of the film. I promise you, once Paris Hilton's gone, the film's really good. I promise.
Paris Hilton. I like her in that movie.
Once she's out of it, it's a really good film. So just stick with it for that first little section, and I promise it is a good payoff.
Hey, that's not hot, Kirsten. That is not hot. But no, I House of Wax, I think this is another important, oh my God, there's so many important points to make about remakes. But another important point about remakes is it depends on the production company that's approaching them. Because I believe it's Dark Castle that did House of Wax, and their theatrical approach to making massive sets that are all practical and interesting, like the actual House of Wax in House of Wax, when it's melting and you see all these like strange pools of horrible stuff. It's so good. The effects in that film, like, I feel like elevate it to another level, and people kind of looked at it as this surface, teenagers being dumb movie. And it's not at all.
I think that's one of those movies as well. Like I watched the original way after I watched the remake. I managed to see it at an all-night horror thing in a cinema. I'd been up for like 20 hours, and House of Wax came on. I had no idea what to expect. And that movie is goofy as hell. Like, it's really, really good, but it's completely different from the remake. And it's again because I don't think you can just remake the original House of Wax, because it's so unique and a product of its time and so strange and odd. If you did it, audiences would be like, what on earth is this? This doesn't make any sense. So you kind of have to make it, again, a product of its time, like the early 2000s, where you do have a lot of these, teenagers getting killed movies. And I do think, for what it is, it's pretty good. It's decent. It's a good laugh. I had good fun watching that, to be honest, with both of them.
It's a nice little return to, it's proper noughties culture, that one. But I mentioned production companies as well, because the Dark Castle does it great, and then you got something like Platinum Dunes, which sees big horror franchises and goes, we can do that again, but do it the same and badly. Because I know the A Nightmare on Elm Street remake released about 10 years ago, recently. Yeah, it's had its 10-year anniversary not so long ago, and I saw that popping up on my feed again and was like, why is this being spoken about again? It was just not good. And I think Friday the 13th had a remake from the same company as well. Like, they just kept pumping out films that had made a massive impression in the time they were released and trying to just do them again. And I think that's the difference between the Hollywood machine and the people who care. You can sense it straight away with those sort of titles. We are running up to our normal podcast time, so we've got loads more, but let's have a look at some questions that we got given from Twitter using the hashtag WC horror thing. My hashtag thing. But yeah, basically, I've got one here which says, what about a TV series of Black Christmas or urban legends? So I felt like that fit the remake theme quite well. So how do you feel? Would you want a TV series of Black Christmas? Would you want that adapted again? Because we've got so many remakes of Black Christmas at this point. And do you think urban legends can be done again at this point and still capture that 90s like strangeness that it did when it came out?
It's difficult, isn't it? Because for Black Christmas, like you said, there have been a good few by now. But like the original, for me, that is one where I think like they completely kind of dropped the ball on the remake, because I like the nastiness of the original that I don't think has been kind of replicated since. But I'm always here for horror things set at Christmas. So if I can have a limited series on, who would I make? HBO, make it horrible and nasty, and I would watch 8 episodes of it. As long as you don't make a second season, I'm here for it. I think that's my pitch to you guys and the world.
You go for a Black Christmas series.
HBO, hit me up.
I'm not sure. I feel like it's been done to death now. It had its 70s one. It had another remake, and then it had the one recently. Both one in 2000s, one last year maybe, and I just leave it alone, please. Leave it alone. It did its job in the 70s, and that's that for me. Urban Legends I'd like to see again, because there's so many new ones that have come around. I think you could do a really cool creepypasta meme kind of thing with it, and take the original formula and do it again and update it, which is the most important part of remakes, as we've spoken about. But yeah, would you like to see either of those, Kirsten, or is there anything else you'd want to see remade?
I mean, I haven't actually seen Black Christmas or Urban Legends. I've never seen those, but now I will have to watch them. I think Urban Legends definitely sounds something that's more probably down my alley. I am always a big fan of like urban legends, creepypastas, and myths and legends and all that sort of stuff. So I think that's something that could very easily work, because we've already got like Black Mirror and Channel Zero and stuff like that, which I really enjoy. So yes, Urban Legends I think would work brilliantly as a series. And Black Christmas I haven't watched, but I've never actually, sorry to say this, Josh, but I've never been a fan of the whole horror Christmas things. I think the only one I ever watched was like Krampus, which I thought was okay. But yes, for me, Christmas is a time of joy and light and colourfulness, and it's probably the only time of year that I don't watch horror movies. So yeah, it's not for me, but Urban Legends I think could work perfectly.
I think that would be a good remake. And that question was from Joe Whitaker. So thank you very much for that. If you guys have any more questions you want to hear us talk about, or if you want even more remake stuff, because I do have a big long list of other things we can talk about with remakes.
Actually, you didn't even mention Evil Dead.
Oh yeah, I wrote Evil Dead down because I didn't mention it, but it needs to be mentioned because it basically fits the whole thing of Fede Alvarez doing it and taking something, turning it into his own, making it the bloodiest, gore, boiling down the Evil Dead to its blood, gore, violence, and then spinning it out as viscerally as possible. It is the most underrated remake because it is an absolute banger and takes someone's original vision and turns it into a new director's funneled down vision into something new. Oh, my words are all going all over the place because Evil Dead deserves a shout out. And Evil Dead 2, because it's technically a remake of Evil Dead 1. So, you know what? The whole Evil Dead series does remakes perfectly. It boils down our points excellently. And also, I need to say The Fly, because The Fly also just needs to be on this list if we're talking about remakes. There's no way we can avoid it. But yeah, Jeff Goldblum. Is there any other shout outs you guys want to cram in before we finish up? Or shall I feel like
we saved all the biggies to the end because we thought they were too obvious, but now we've run out of time, so everyone's going to think we missed them off and we didn't know about them. It's a complete tragedy. I think The Fly is a good one to end on. Evil Dead, so good. That's me done. I'm out. I'm out. I'm tapping out.
I just want to shout out Last House on the Left as well. If you've not seen that, that is a brilliant film. It's kind of old, but yeah, that's another one that if you haven't watched, it's a proper good remake. I highly recommend. Proper good vengeance film.
And we've gone for all the violent ones here. We've gone, oh, okay, this was maybe a bit tame in its time, but now, hell, watch them cut each other up. Watch them put. Oh, actually, I won't spoil the end of Last House on the Left.
Don't spoil.
Oh God, it's a choice. But
you got it.
Absolutely. There's so many great remakes. There are so many terrible remakes. I think we've kind of settled on the point that as long as you're taking something and offering something new with it, then go ahead, but maybe don't use the branding if it's quite too new. There's a weird middle ground in all this, and so many mixed varied opinions and so many exceptions to any rules that you set. I don't think you know what you want from a remake. I stand by that you don't know what you want for a remake until you are delivered it, because you can't really pin down the best parts of any of these films until you see them played out again with a different voice on them. So yeah, some work really well, some work really bad. And that's just the way it be sometimes. But if you have any more questions that you want us to answer in these horror podcasts, then please send in your tweets to us on social media. Use the WC Horror hashtag. Just let us know what you think about remakes, what you want to know about more remakes, what you want us to talk about in future episodes, all that fun stuff. So you can catch me on Twitter at @AshMillman, and you can catch Kirsten at Twitter on
@KirstenRia with 2 A's.
And you can catch Josh on
@JoshBrune with 2 O's.
Lovely, lovely. Mine has no extra letters, which now I feel silly about. But here we go. It's the end of the podcast. We finally got there. Thank you for joining us. Hopefully you'll see some more horror stuff from us soon. Have a lovely weekend and stay safe and all that stuff. You know what I mean. Have a nice time. Join us again soon.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye. Bye.